In this series, lowimpact.org talks with people working to build a mutually owned, democratic, decentralised economy that builds community and doesn't destroy nature. We want to increase collaboration to bring about system change. Find links to the sites mentioned in the videos in the description below. Join the conversation by liking, commenting and subscribing to our channel.
I've looked into some of your ideas. I know you've got ideas about, the ideas that incorporate water supply, sustainable ways of dealing with sewage to produce compost, also flood prevention and some electricity generation too via hydro. And actually, I saw that you're talking about ponds as well in which fish can be raised. So we're talking water, sewage, soil improvement, irrigation, flood prevention, energy and food. It's just such a fantastic package. I mean, why don't the corporations do it? I mean, I guess it's back to profit again, isn't it?
Well, it's totally back to profit. I mean, we live in a world where, I'll come across as a Luddite, and I'm not. I love my modern technology, but we need appropriate technology. And the problem is that, our water companies seem to have been given this free rein to exploit, not just in failing to provide safe wastewater and sustainable wastewater services. Is pretty much the same with drinking water supply. And we've had this commodification of water. This is so often the way in our society. Commodification of food. Don't get me wrong, farm chemicals have done an extraordinary job in producing consistent and pretty reliable food supplies, but it's been at a cost that frankly is unacceptable. We talk now in terms of true cost accounting of things, particularly farming. Patrick Holden's Sustainable Food Trust did some great work on this following 2012. And that's been taken further forward. Great book by Routledge on true cost accounting. So what are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about the degradation primarily of our farmland and the soil, and that is the major part of the natural water cycle in any country. And I'm afraid to say that the typical footprint of civilization is to destroy soil. It's a 5,000-year story. And guess what? It's all about top-down power hierarchies. Wittfogel, the German historian, spelt this out beautifully. He talked about hydraulic empires, and it's a recurring pattern. So, you have, in Wittfogel's terms, a despotic elite who want to control their populations, and they do this by many bread and circuses. Well, let's just take the bread portion. I love my bread. Good job. You can't see my belly right now. But not only is it not terribly good for us, it's shocking for the soil. Some cereals, of course, but only ever as a part of rotation. And there's shocking deserts in the Middle East. But we know at the dawn of civilization, where what we call now the Fertile Crescent, are now just totally aridified through this hydraulic empire approach. And, there have been various, unfortunately, rather lone voices, Kropotkin, Bill Mollison, Rudolf Steiner, who've come along and pointed out that actually we can do this vastly better on our own in the local community. And there is a common theme here. And again, it's all to do with restoring soil as opposed to degrading soil. And there's a huge, it's not just a debate, there's a row going on in farming circles, particularly about this. Let's not go into that. It is actually fairly simple, but we've had incredibly, at last, we've had these 5 new principles from DEFRA that we should have always followed in terms of environmental management. They're proposing these now for all environmental policy processes, radical things like the polluter pays, resolve problems at source, follow the circular economy. We should have always done that. I mean, apply those to the water industry now, and you'd bring it down overnight. So yeah, in terms of water supply, we're in the era of smart meters. Well, you know, and yeah, growing water shortage for a load of reasons, and it's not just mismanagement of the soil. I was up at Chalford above Stroud just before this recent rainfall that came in over the weekend, and yeah, every time I look at our local rivers, I'm shocked, not just by the appalling quality, or lack of quality. The sedimentation is awful, the siltation, the runoff from the fields, but also the low base flows. So Stroud's rivers were once renowned for their consistent good flows. That's why we had all the water mills here. We might talk a bit about hydro in a minute. But essentially, whilst water companies have plans for catchment management and that they're required to produce these, there's not really a great deal of motivation, or frankly, you know, I don't want to offend anyone, not a great deal of expertise in the higher levels of the water companies and understanding how to go about these. So, and this knocks on to issues like flood control. And yeah, there's a myriad of vested interests. I had the experience of 5 years trying to fix flooding in the Slad Valley. And the way we work at Water21 is to work primarily with postgraduate students, either as interns or for their dissertation studies. And just following the conduct of the SLAD flood alleviation scheme following the awful 2007 floods was awful. I mean, there are these things called treasury rules that apply to all public expenditure. And yeah, you know, of course, there have to be rules on how public money is spent. But we'd already scoped out years ago what's now called natural flood management, upstream attenuation. And at every stage, I mean, essentially the authorities were trying to obstruct us. And in the end, I mean, thankfully, they did come up with a scheme. Excuse me. In the end, they did come up with a scheme to attenuate flood water upstream in a dispersed manner, similar to what we were proposing. But not until 300,000 of the £500,000 budget had been spent on ridiculously trying to plan two 30-foot high concrete dams in an area of outstanding natural beauty that we knew right at the start could never be built. They wouldn't be allowed. Whereas our scheme, certainly for the cost of a single flood in that valley, 80 odd houses at that time were getting flooded every 5 or so years. In 2007, we had the great flood that occurred that year in North Gloucestershire. It was a 1 in 600 year flood event. Over Stroud, it was a 1 in 25 year event. So it was a bad flood. The bottom end of the Slad Road was 9 foot deep, and those 80 odd houses yet again got inundated. Absolutely terrible to be living in a house at flood risk. The stress that it puts on householders, the near impossibility of getting insurance against flooding. I mean, absolutely shocking. But when we looked into it, we found, yeah, probably just for that $500,000 budget that had been allocated just for scoping solutions, we could have fixed it. And we could have fixed it. Variety of solutions, low-level impoundments across the valley floor, not 30-foot high concrete dams, 2 of them, but probably 30 2-meter high dams, which largely would have been lost in the landscape. Simple letterbox culverts going through them, minimal maintenance. Over 90% of the landowners welcomed this. If that wasn't acceptable, then storm storage reservoirs, which the farmers could have irrigated with, as well. One very wise farmer put it when I asked him politely, would he be willing to host a storm storage reservoir on his land? His answer was so telling. I mean, he was a wise farmer. He said, of course I would, but they won't allow it. Well, and that just said it all, didn't it? They, who were they? Well, they were those civil engineering interests primarily who want to carry on pouring concrete past floodwaters, typically downstream. They were trying to attenuate in Stroud, but as I said, it was a totally impractical concrete engineered scheme. And we have to remember concrete is a huge contribution to CO2 emissions. So yeah, soft engineered solutions. And why did the farmer say, of course? Well, because he could have then, with an appropriate license, which I'm sure could have been granted, in the short term, have absolutely prevented any drought problems on his farm. But he could, over time, have finessed that water availability into other forms of farming. He might have, taken up potato growing. I mean, root vegetables are better for the soil than cereals, and they're better for us. And typically a potato crop will return 4 times the calories per acre than a grain crop. These are relatively easy solutions. So when anyone talks to you about the problem of world hunger, bluntly, they don't really understand agriculture, and they're just pandering to a corporate paradigm that's been used to force chemicals on us.
So your remit is huge, isn't it? You're talking about a whole range. You're not just talking about water and sewage. It's all about agriculture and flood prevention and electricity generations in the mix. And so how do we get from where we are now, this top-down giantism sort of approach, to the soft engineering?
Well,
commons ownership. What are the steps? How do we get there?
It's a paradigm, and as one of the leaders of Stroud District Council told me, and a senior Environment Agency officer back around about 95, sewage, the initial investment program around Stroud hadn't achieved the results hoped for in terms of curtailing sewage pollution. In fact, at that time, sewage was regularly coming up in the middle of the meadow. I got great pictures of seagulls turd bobbing in front of the environmental health officers at Ebley Mill, which I got published in the local press, which didn't probably do me much good. But as this leader of the district council told me, and they were being honest with me, they said, and we'd pointed out that myself and the Environment Agency man sitting next to me, that that material coming up in the middle of the meadow was highly dangerous raw sewage. And their response was, well, we politicians aren't very interested in sewage. And I'm afraid to say, that's a really key point. Why are they not very interested in sewage? Well, the public aren't very interested in sewage. So to come back to your point, we're only going to do something about it if we get off our backsides and do something about it ourselves. And, where in the case of the Stroud Water Company, the company that serves Stroud, needs some defense, they took these problems very seriously. And at the time of water privatization, on behalf of those various people who were coming to me in the 80s, in the run-up to this, the water company at chairman level entered into a written agreement with us, to absolutely prevent any sewage surcharges into the river. That was why it was coming up in the middle of Ebley Meadow, because the water company was preventing it from coming up in the river, out into the river. And then the second part of the agreement was to look into these naturalistic, low-cost solutions. And I'm pleased to say that water company, with a little bit more pressure via the regulator, the Environment Agency, they've put in 800 reed beds at their smaller sewage treatment works. They're not the best design, but they're adequate. And
800?
800 they've put in, all the other water companies put together. So there's one of our early achievements. Indirectly, it was the regulator who forced it. And it came about, first of all, at Avening Sewage Works. If you go to Google Earth, you can see the...
So the big corporations are not saying that the naturalistic solutions don't work. They'll sometimes use them. They know that they work.
Well, it's an anomaly in the case of this water company, local one. They were forced. I mean, there was a huge argy-bargy. They challenged it. They tried to trash the
right. Okay.
It went to court. But yeah, we were able, because the flow in the stream, and this is appropriate now with climate change and amplification of climate change, actually I think is the number one pressing issue we should all be talking about. The local receiving watercourse from the Evening Sewage Works was drying up in the early 90s. So basically the only flow in the watercourse was the treated sewage. So the usual Royal Commission standard for discharge, I think it was set in 1912. Unbelievable, isn't it? So talking about antiquated standards. Anyway,
yeah.
We were able, by applying pressure to they were the National Rivers Authority. They then became the Environment Agency, able to get them to change that Royal Commission standard and set a higher standard, because just downstream from there was a lake that was becoming increasingly prone to what's called eutrophication or algal blooms. And once all the argy-bargy was finished, the water company got behind it. And but it's only really ever been applied regionally within this one water company's area of responsibility. And frankly, it's a far more onerous duty. That application is called tertiary polishing. So in sewage treatment, you have primary treatment, which is screening out all the plastics and hard materials, non-biodegradable materials, and I'm sorry to say that normally goes to be incinerated. Then you have the secondary treatment, which is then to recover the sludge and the bulk of the nutrient, but you still have a very nutrient-rich liquid, which typically is then discharged to rivers. But if you put then tertiary polishing in, you can strip all that nutrient out. If you do it with a reed bed, and I'm always learning. I've just come across a fantastic local Stroud originated real sci-fi solution, totally not naturalistic system. I mean, I'll plug it now. Ionic exchange, which can also, just like a reed bed, produce a usable nutrient. It strips that nitrates out of the wastewater, whether it be for drinking water. Not suggesting using sewage for drinking water, but it can be used on a potable drinking water supply, every one of which in the UK is overburdened with nitrates, or it can be used on a sewage discharge, and it's all packaged in a box. So all the solutions are there, but I suspect the high-tech solution again is too cheap. So all these things can basically be offered into the competitive market. The water statutes require competition. I mean, I wrote about this in the 1990s, and you can maybe link a resurgence article that I wrote then, calling for community groups to basically compete as the law allows.
Yes, we'll put links to articles. If you could send me as many links as you can, and I'll
I mean, in the case of this school that is being charged, well, we've got them down from that initial 90,000 a year, but they're still trying to claim, subject to review and appeal, surface water drainage charges. I mean, we know it works, and whether it be this large country house where we're just refurbishing the 30-year-old system, or the school that's got a 13-year-old system, it's called SUD, Sustainable Urban Drainage. Of course, we're in a rural area here. I think that's given us a good overview, but I mean, we could go much deeper on all of this. I mean, farming, it's as we found in Sri Lanka a year or two back, where the government had the great idea of going organic. I think within an 18-month period, they just banned all the farm chemicals. I mean, you can't do that. It's a huge, the clue's in the name, agriculture. It's a cultural change. So we've had 1,000 years and probably more, probably 5,000 years, talking to some people about the local aquifer a few days ago. And yeah, we've had 5,000 years of mismanagement of the local aquifer here in Stroud and the Cotswolds. And agriculture is the key villain. You know, chopping down forests, draining wetlands, these have all been fatal to the local natural water cycle.
So you and your group, Water21, you have the skills and experience to build a water commons. And we have a group of commoners in Stroud who want to help you do it. But what resources do you need to do it? Tell us a bit more about your businesses and what resources do you need?
Okay, so yeah, we're formalized in a legal sense as two not-for-profit limited companies, Water21 Limited, which represents the community level of water interest and engagement and realization of resources and addressing all these critical risks, and Water21 Power Limited, which in theory provides the funds to support the community work. The key thing we need, and I just refer you to the founding principles of Agenda 21, because the clue is in the name. We're in an Agenda 21 organization, is the collaborative approach that Agenda 21 outlines. And all I've ever done at Water21 is bring together earlier knowledge from the older generation. You can't turn the clock back, but the clock goes full circle. I think I've mentioned we have constructed wetlands in Gloucestershire that are 100 years old and still working. That technology has been greatly refined. I work in small hydro. We're working actually with a 100-year-old turbine design that's been refined, sadly not in this country. We have to get that in from Germany. So it's this combination of intergenerational knowledge and really sharing the vision for safe and viable water management, which is so sorely lacking. It's only with that shared vision that we can enable positive change. So essentially in Stroud, I hate to say, for all of its green credentials, we're a little different in terms of the prevailing flush and forget mentality. So it's about taking responsibility. And sure, you know, because this is a critical risk, as professional environmental engineers, if someone asks us to help, we are obligated to help. So there may or may not be a great deal that we can do in terms of planning systems, but when resources are available, we will, as we did for Churchtown Council between Gloucester and Cheltenham about 12 years ago, do the whole design process of a system for a community.
Right, and you're able to do that. So, I mean, we have this commons financing without debt idea. I'll put a link in the description with more information about that. But can you give us some idea about how much money would be needed? I mean, even to get started.
Okay.
And what else? And what else do we need? What other resources do we need? Where would we start?
Okay.
How would it work? Just well, not in any great detail, but just an overview.
You do need to know some of the detail.
Yeah.
Basically, all the work at Water21, and we have funded and mentored over 50 postgraduate students now in the last 30 years, has come about through a mixture of goodwill and serendipity. I mean, I've worked as a farm labourer, been chimneys through much of this time, just to keep my mind clear, really, so that I could then focus on environmental projects. So yeah, goodwill and serendipity are vital. The Churchtown project, for example, that was led by two wonderful women. That is significant in these projects very often. And they achieved a very large scheme, which we'll get some pictures up, hopefully, for about £100,000. And in terms of sewage treatment function, which I stress it's not being used for, that scheme could have dealt with 50 or maybe 100 people's wastewater. It's just used for surface drainage presently. So, you know, every site is different. Every problem is an opportunity. You know, if I could lead on a bit here, we need to understand that we're in competition here. You know, that there is an existing very powerful water infrastructure and private ownership. And a lot of people bought shares in water companies. You know, there was this vision of a share-owning democracy. Well, it didn't exactly work out as we were told. You do need funds, and obviously investing in a local structure, a local reed bed or dewatering system, or even a freshwater supply system, frankly, is a much safer investment than buying shares or even allowing your pension fund to invest in things like these water companies who are failing. You know, so it's
and they're struggling. They're struggling. The big water companies, aren't they? So it's
they're just out of control. And so when you invest through the commons approach in local services, it's all immediately visible. All the funding process is totally transparent. There aren't loads of middlemen taking their rake off. You know, I used to have a mate years ago. He was a stockbroker, spent all of his time, or most of his time, working for pension funds. You know, he changed his Aston Martin every 6 months.
Well, we don't want to fund that.
No.
No offense to your mate, but we don't.
Yeah. Where? Well, you know, immediately where unmanaged sewer overflows are occurring, these are a critical risk to public health. They need immediate action. There is a whole load of red tape, I'm sorry to say, of course, and I've tried to work through this. So you need, in order to bill customers upstream, and you know, remember way back before the privatization, and even before the Labour reorganization of the water industry into authorities in '74, we used to get a water rate. It was part of our rates bill that we paid the council. And that's another huge issue, you know, the division of responsibility for water services, particularly wastewater services, the exclusion of these from the local planning process within local authorities has been another fatal blow. So yeah, you need this inset appointment. Well, when I looked at it, the costs of an inset appointment for a small community, it was about 100 population. And again, we'll put the drawing up for you if you want to see that. The bureaucracy and red tape that Ofwat wanted in terms of costs was comparable to the cost of the system. And in that case, we had a very keen landowner, but the rest of the community were not motivated. And ironically, they all ended up paying colossal connection fees for the water company solution that was then imposed on them. So it may well be, in terms of this huge mess, and it is a mess, it's a catastrophic mess, the need for a test case or more in law is pretty evident. I mean, frankly, I don't believe water companies have a case in law to enforce their bills, bluntly. I mean, they're in breach of Section 94 of the Water Act. They're failing to effectually drain huge areas of the UK. And, you know, not just that, they're threatening public health. Quite the fact they are a huge burden on climate issues by, you know, failing to make use of all this nutrient.
So I mean, financing has always been a problem when it comes to bringing industries into common or community ownership. But new commons ideas are emerging based on the purchasing of, in effect, future use vouchers. In this case, the provision of water and the removal of sewage. And as I said, I'll put more information about that in the description. But we're going to have a stab at doing that in Stroud. We've got a group of people who are meeting regularly in Stroud to talk about building a water commons, a land commons, and a food commons. And those things are so interrelated that they're inseparable, really. But there are other groups too, looking into housing, finance, community spaces, energy, education, and more. And we'd like to invite people to contact us if they think they'd like to be involved in any of those groups.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, bluntly, in all those issues, this is a much safer investment, people's money, than the alternatives.
Yeah. All right then, Julian. I
Okay.
think we can leave it there. I think it's been fantastic talking with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we'll definitely see how this goes. And yeah, I'll speak to you again soon.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Julian. Bye-bye.
If you like our channel, please consider liking this video and subscribing. The more people like our videos and subscribe to our channel, the more the YouTube algorithm will share them. It doesn't cost anything, so please press the like and subscribe buttons. And if you click the bell icon just underneath as well, you'll get a notification when we upload a new video. Thank you.